Have you ever been misled? Have you ever believed something that you found out later wasn't true? How did that make you feel? What happened? What was that thing like? This is the central idea in Book 7 of Plato's Republic. In this book here, we're going to talk about one of the most famous stories in all of the history of Western philosophy. Okay, this story is called The Allegory of the Cave. And this story is about a group of people who are fooled, and many of whom have no chance of finding out what reality truly is. Stay tuned. In Book 7 here, you may remember at the end of Book 6, we finished with Socrates describing the divided line, which talks about his epistemological perspective on the sensory world versus the intelligible world. Now, this is going to be an important concept for us moving into the Allegory of the Cave in Book 7 of the Republic. Let's just remind ourselves real quick. In philosophy, epistemology refers to theories of truth and knowledge. Now, for Plato, the senses necessarily mislead us. Okay, they are necessarily in error most of the time. And what can guide our knowledge in a truer fashion is the intellect. Now, we're going to be looking at the Allegory of the Cave. That is a major point in this section of the book. But this isn't the only thing that Plato has for us here. He'll also be describing the role of leadership and philosophers as it relates to the Allegory of the Cave, which is ultimately a metaphor for all of civilized society. So in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and also just for those of us who may not be aware, an allegory is a story, a fictional story that is told in order to communicate some kind of moral value, a lesson, something like that, something that is supposed to communicate a form of wisdom. So the Allegory of the Cave begins with a group of prisoners who are chained to a wall, okay? They're shackled against a wall inside a cave. They can move their heads like a little bit side to side, but that's about it. So all they can really see is in front of them. They can see the people next to them, and they can, well, most of what they see is right in front of them. And what's important here is not what is in front of them as much as what is behind them. Behind them, there is a big fire, and that fire casts light. And that light produces shadows on the wall in front of them. Now, Plato believes that these people will look at these shadows and they will form theories about those shadows. They will talk about them. They will categorize them. They will describe them. They will go into all kinds of detail about what those shadows are and what they represent. They'll even have contests about who knows the most about the shadows. But are the shadows real? No, they are not. Right? And this is the point. Plato believes people are born into the cave. But sometimes people escape. Now, what happens when they escape? When someone escapes their confines in the cave, they break free from the shackles. The first thing they do is turn around. And when they turn around, they see the fire. And the fire is so brilliant that it is blinding. They're unable to look at it for very long at first. But then what happens? They continue to look back at it. And they spend a little bit longer looking at it. And then the next time they spend a little bit longer looking at it. And eventually, their eyes accustom to the light of the fire. And they're able to see a pathway that wasn't visible to them before because they weren't able to see it. And the escaped prisoner takes that pathway and they travel up out of the cave into the world above. And you know what happens when they get into the world above? It's so bright that they, again, can't see anything. The light, the brilliance of the sun blinds them to everything around them. So what do? They look at things. They look at some of the real things that exist up there. A real tree, as opposed to the shadow of a tree that they might have thought they saw while they were in the cave. They see a real tree. They see a real rock. They see a real stream, a real meadow, a real mountain. And this is a completely new experience for them. It's something that they've never been able to comprehend before, and they understand just how shallow their knowledge was while they were in the cave. And eventually, after spending enough time outside of the cave in the real world, looking at the real things, they're able to direct their gaze a little bit more toward the sun. But it hurts because it's too bright. It's too powerful. But they persist. They know that the sun is the source of their ability to see all of the real things. This is part of what draws their attention to the fire, too. There's like an innate sense that the fire is the source of the shadows. So they're curious about it. They want to see it. They want to understand it. Same thing with the sun. They want to look at it. And eventually, after much practice, they are able to look at the sun. And then they have an obligation. Now, it is a voluntary obligation, but it is one that Plato argues people will feel no matter what. People are obligated to go back down into the cave and tell the others that this isn't all there is. What you're looking at are shadows. They're not real. There are actually real things up there, but you have to break your shackles. You have to contend with the excessive brightness of the fire and then eventually the sun. But if you do that for long enough, you can know about the real things. Now, how do you think the other prisoners in the cave react to that? They hate it. They think he's crazy. They think this person is crazy for talking about the outside world, or for saying that they need to leave their shackles where they're so comfortable, that they need to endure the pain of looking at a fire in the sun and trying to brave the outside world. They hate this person. But regardless, Plato says they must persist. They must act as leaders for the people in the cave. They must help them gradually, piece by piece, make their escape, journey upwards toward the surface world, and eventually behold the sun. There's a nice quote from the text here, too, that I have. It says, "At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled to suddenly stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look toward the light, he will be pained and dazzled. He will not be able to see the realities of which, in his former state, he had seen the shadows." Okay, this is about the painful process of education. I mean, painful is excessive, maybe, right? It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to learn things. That's fine. We all know that. What do the different elements in this story represent? There are a few different elements. Each stands for something a little bit different. So the cave, right? As we discussed, according to Plato's epistemological perspective, the sensory world is illusory. Okay? The intelligible, the rational world is real and contains real wisdom and real knowledge if we but turn our attention toward it. So the cave, the shadows on the wall, this is the world of the senses. The shadows are illusions. They're social norms. They're the opinions of people in the public whose opinions we shouldn't value as much as we do, but we do anyway because it's convention, because we are socialized to do so, because it would be weird if we didn't. the prisoner breaking free from the cave and ascending up into the real world. That is the process of education, specifically philosophy, right? And if you remember from our earlier segments on the Republic, philosophy is really just a love of wisdom, a love of learning, and a capacity to learn well. A philosopher is someone who learns well and likes to learn everything. So that ascent into the real world is the process of learning about everything as much as you possibly can. And the sun is the good. Okay, now this brings us back into Plato's theory of the forms, right? So for Plato, every characteristic of things that exists, goodness, beauty, justice, piety or holiness, it's difficult to define what these things are in themselves. And that's important, and that's kind of good. Like, it's easier to recognize something that is like an action that is just, or a painting, or a view that is beautiful. These are easy to identify. But when you try to define what beauty and justice and goodness are in themselves, that becomes a little bit trickier. Now, those are the forms. They don't exist here. They don't exist on our plane, on our realm. They exist somewhere out there. And through the practice of philosophy, we can better start to understand them. And the sun, in this case, is the form of the good. It is goodness itself, which is the cause of everything else that we can learn. Knowledge itself is good. So the pursuit of knowledge leads one eventually to an understanding of what good itself is. And that is the ultimate project of philosophy. Now, Plato takes this allegory and this train of thought and applies it to social and political life. And that is the descent of the escaped prisoner who has accustomed themselves to the outside world and the light of the sun and has been able to apprehend something near the good itself. It is their responsibility to lead. This is, again, we're back to some concepts we talked about a while ago. The philosopher-king, right? What makes the philosopher-king a good leader? They have begun to understand the good, the form of the good. But other people may not be receptive to what this person has to say. Another nice quote from the text here. Would he not be ridiculous? Men would say of him that up he went and down he came without his eyes, and that it was better not even to think of ascending. Now you may be asking yourself, what is the point of this? What is the relevance to me today? Why should I care? Now, I would hope that my listeners would have that you would have lots of ideas about what this means and how this pertains to you in your everyday life. But in case that's not apparent right now, in the world of social media here, there are things called echo chambers, right? And in an echo chamber, this is essentially when your social media algorithm has figured out the kind of viewpoints you hold, some opinions you have, ideas you like, and it basically feeds you more and more of these things, leading to a perpetual state of confirmation bias. You're receiving evidence that supports views you already hold. Therefore, you don't question yourself. You don't learn about new things that are outside of your current realm of knowledge. And this is just one example. We could think about the culture that you grow up in. There are certain norms, there are certain beliefs about the roles that people should have in society. These are all just versions of the cave. And in terms of practically living, okay, part of the reason I do this channel and part of the reason that I continue to study philosophy is because It is one of the only things that I believe pushes me and others to continue to reconsider things, to try to shake off any misunderstandings that you hold on to, and try to see some new light, because it happens. You know, sometimes you crawl out of one cave and you find yourself in another, and there's nothing wrong with that, but keep in mind that it's a thing that happens. You know, hope you all got something out of this video. I'm going to be back pretty soon with book 8. It has been great talking to you here. I will see you next time.